What happens aback you acquaint a adventure so able that it makes a Hollywood fable angle up and airing off your date afterwards adage a word. Robert Redford rose from his chair, silent, his face unreadable. Jimmy Fallon froze mid-sentence. The flat admirers gasped. The cameras kept rolling, but Cypher knew what to do. 30 abnormal earlier, aggregate had been normal. Now, one of the greatest actors in history was walking abroad from the tonight actualization in the average of a live broadcast. What Jimmy had aloof said afflicted everything. And what happened to Budding would redefine what it agency to be animal on backward night television. 12 account earlier, the actualization had started like any added Thursday night. The Roots were playing, the Admirers was energized, and Jimmy Fallon bounced to assimilate the date with his signature enthusiasm. Robert Redford was the night's capital guest, a attenuate actualization for the 87-year-old figure who had abundantly stepped abroad from the spotlight. "Ladies and gentlemen, Robert Redford," Jimmy announced, and the flat erupted. Redford absolved out slowly, bouncing to the army with that asperous smile that had captivated audiences for 6 decades. He acclimatized into the bedfellow armchair, and the account began with the accepted pleasantries. New projects, old memories, the affectionate of chat that fills backward night slots. But Jimmy had able article altered for tonight, article he'd never aggregate about before. About 8 account into the interview, Jimmy's accent shifted. He put bottomward his agenda cards, a move his producers anon noticed from the ascendancy room. Aback Jimmy Fallon puts bottomward his cards, article ad-lib is about to happen. "Bob," Jimmy said, "application the acquaintance that alone comes from 18-carat respect. I appetite to acquaint you article I've never told anyone on this show. It's about my grandfather." Redford leaned advanced slightly. The admirers quieted. Alike the Roots chock full their accepted accomplishments riffing. "My grandfathering fought in World War II, Jimmy continued. He never talked about it, not already in my absolute childhood, but afore he died he gave me something." Jimmy accomplished into his anorak abridged and pulled out a baby-beat photograph. The camera zoomed in as he captivated it up. A atramentus and white angel of adolescent soldier continuing in advance of aggressive jeep. This photo was taken in France, 1944. My grandfathering kept it in his wallet for 60 years. Redford's announcement changed. Article in his eyes shifted. Recognition or conceivably article deeper. Jimmy's articulation absurd slightly. On the aback there's a note. He wrote it the night afore D-Day. Jimmy angry the photo over and the camera captured the achromatic handwriting. "If I don't accomplish it back, acquaint them I saw adorableness alike here. Acquaint them Robert showed me that adventuresomeness looks like kindness." The flat went absolutely silent. Jimmy chock-full mid-breath. Robert Redford's face had gone pale. "Bob," Jimmy said softly, "my grandfather's name was James Fallon Sr. He died in 2002, and until aftermost month I had no abstraction who Robert was in this note." Redford stood up. Not abruptly, not dramatically, aloof slowly, deliberately, like a man who had aloof heard a apparition allege his name. Jimmy chock-full talking. The admirers didn't apperceive whether to acclaim or breach silent. The producers in the ascendancy allowance were aimlessly signaling to the cameras to accumulate rolling. Cypher in that flattened Cypher watching at home was able for what Robert Redford did next. He absolved over to Jimmy's desk, not to the ancillary area guests usually angle for photos, but about to Jimmy's side. He placed one duke on Jimmy's shoulder, and with the other, he acclaimed took the photograph. "May I?" he whispered, his articulation almost best up by the microphones. Jimmy nodded, clumsy to speak. Redford advised the photo for what acquainted like an eternity. His easily were shaking. Afresh he looked anon into the camera, not at Jimmy, not at the audience, but beeline into the lens, and said 8 words that would breach the internet oral minutes. "I bethink him. I bethink all of them." And afresh he absolved off stage, not to his bathrobe room, not backstage. He absolved anon into the flat audience, still captivation the photograph. The cameras followed him as he chock-full in the 3rd row area an aged woman was sitting. She was cutting an aggressive ancestor's pin on her jacket. Redford knelt bottomward beside her chair. The microphones almost bent what he said. "Did you lose someone too?" The woman nodded, tears already alive bottomward her face. "My brother Normandy, subscribe and leave an animate version because the best able allotment of this adventure is still ahead. What happened to Budding wasn't planned by any producer, wasn't in any script, and couldn't except been staged if they tried. Robert Redford, 87 years old, one of the best clandestine men in Hollywood, sat bottomward in the admirers appropriate there in the 3rd row. He handed the photograph to the woman and began to acquaint her. And anybody in that studio, an adventure he'd kept bashful for 80 years. Jimmy Fallon stood up from his desk. The actualization had stopped. There was no actualization anymore. Aloof, a moment of raw ad-lib altruism advance in absolute time. I was 8 years old in 1944. Redford began, his articulation abiding but quiet. My uncle was stationed in Europe. He wrote us letters, but they were censored. We had no abstraction what he was absolutely seeing. Afresh one day, a soldier came to our abode in California. He was on medical leave. His name was James. Jimmy's Duke went to his mouth. The camera bent the exact moment he accomplished what Redford was saying. He backward with us for 3 days. Redford continued, my parents insisted. He didn't appetite to be a burden, but my mother wouldn't apprehend of it. And in those 3 days, James Fallon became the earlier brother I never had. The absolute flat admirers was errant now. So were the bandage members. So were the cameramen. He accomplished me how to bandy a curveball. He told me about New York. He talked about his dreams. He capital to accessible a restaurant a back the war was over. He capital to get married, accept kids, alive a accustomed life. Redford paused, his articulation breaking, and he told me article I've never forgotten. He said, Robert, if I don't accomplish it back, you accomplish it count. You alive abundant for both of us. Redford looked up at Jimmy, who had absolved bottomward from the date, and was now continuing at the bend of the audience. I didn't apperceive he'd accounting that note, Redford said. I didn't apperceive he kept a photograph, but I kept my affiance to him. Abaft the scenes, the show's producers fabricated a accommodation that defied every arrangement expectation. They connected the broadcast, no commercials, no time limit, aloof let it happen. Jimmy sat bottomward in the alley, appropriate there on the attic of flat 6B. Robert Redford was in the audience. The bedfellow had become the storyteller. The host had become the listener. And 11 actor bodies watching at home witnessed article that had never happened in the history of backward night television. Afterwards the war, Redford continued. I approved to acquisition out what happened to James. I was aloof a kid, but I wrote Bellatrix to the military. I never heard back. I affected he couldn't accomplishment the sentence. The aged woman in the third row accomplished out and took Redford's hand. He fabricated it back, she said softly. If this is the James Fallon from the 101st Airborne, he fabricated it back. He lived until 2002. He did, Jimmy confirmed, his articulation almost audible. He opened that restaurant in Queens. Called it the Normandy Cafe. He got married, had 3 kids. My dad was the youngest. But this is the moment no one in the flat and no one watching at home any time saw coming. Redford accomplished into his own anorak pocket. He pulled out a baby bankrupt allotment of cardboard yellowed with age. I agitated this for 80 years. He said it's the alone letter James anytime beatific me. It accustomed 3 months afterwards he larboard our house. I never showed it to anyone. He abundanted anxiously and began to read. Dear Robert, I fabricated it to France. I'm scared, but I bethink what you told me. Adventuresomeness is aloof actuality afraid and accomplishing it anyway. Thank you for reminding me what I'm angry for. I'm angry for kids like you who bandy curveballs and dream big. If I don't accomplish at home, you accomplish abiding, you become somebody. You accomplish abiding, my seed meant something. Your acquaintance James Fallon was above board ball now. So was anybody else. The Roots bagman had his arch in his hands. The date administrator had chock full alike, assuming to work. Redford anxiously refolded the letter and handed it to Jimmy. This belongs with that photograph, he said. Your grandfathering kept his promise. He fabricated at home. He congenital activity and he aloft to ancestors that produced you. Addition who brings joy to millions of bodies every distinct night. And a fresh Robert Redford did article that no one expected. He took off his jacket. Underneath he was cutting a simple white shirt. Affianced to the shirt was a baby brownish pin. Aggressive ancestors account pin from World War II. I've beat this beneath my clothes for 80 years. Redford said, I wore it to every audition, every cine set, every award ceremony. It was my way of befitting James with me, of befitting my affiance to him. He aparted boring and with abashed easily he affianced it to Jimmy's jacket. You accumulate it now, Redford whispered. Pass it to your kids. Acquaint them about James. Acquaint them about the men who gave us this activity we get to live. The flat erupted, not in applause, in article above applause. It was a complete of aggregate ablution of 200 bodies accompanying absolution 80 years of bond affliction and gratitude. Jimmy stood up and accepted Redford. The 2 men captivated anniversary added for a connected moment while the cameras captured every second. Aback, they assuredly separated. Jimmy looked into Redford's eyes and said, Thank you for befitting your affiance to him. Thank you for absolution me assuredly accumulate it completely, Redford replied. They absolved a back to the date together, not host and bedfellow anymore. Article abroad entirely. Brothers in a adventure that transcended actualization business, transcended fame, transcended aggregate except the axiological accuracy of animal connection. Jimmy sat aback at his desk, but he didn't aces up his agenda cards. He looked anon into the camera, and batten with a accuracy and purpose that acquainted like a altered being than the actor who had started the actualization an hour ago. We absorb so abundant time aggravating to be funny, aggravating to entertain, aggravating to abstract bodies from their lives, Jimmy said. But maybe the best important affair we can do is aloof remember. Bethink the bodies who gave us this. Bethink that every distinct one of us is actuality because addition about fabricated a seed will never absolutely understand. Allotment and subscribe. Accomplish abiding this adventure is never forgotten. Robert Redford sat aback bottomward in the bedfellow chair, but the account didn't continue. Instead, Jimmy asked the audience, "Does anyone abroad accept a adventure about addition who didn't accomplish it aback or addition who did?" For the abutting 20 minutes, the Tonight actualization became article it had never been before. A dozen bodies from the admirers stood up, an aggregate belief of grandparents, parents, uncles, and ancestors who had served. Robert Redford listened to anniversary. One, afraid hands, alms quiet words of comfort, witnessing their affliction and their pride. The actualization didn't end until about midnight. 90% account accomplished its appointed time slot. NBC let it run. They knew what they were witnessing. In the canicule that followed, article amazing happened. The video of that night went viral in a way that Ball Agreeable rarely does. It wasn't aggregate for shock, value, or controversy. It was aggregate because it reminded bodies of article they'd forgotten. It reminded them that abaft every backward night joke, every Hollywood premiere, every moment of bogus entertainment, there are absolute animal beings accustomed to absolute stories. Jimmy Fallon never took off that pin. He wore it to every actualization thereafter. Aback bodies asked him about it. He told them the story, not for attention, but because, as he said, some promises are too important to accumulate to yourself. Robert Redford, who had spent decades alienated claimed publicity, gave one account afterwards that night. In it, he said, "I spent 80 years cerebration. I'd bootless James because I never begin out what happened to him. But Jimmy gave me article added admired than answers. He gave me completion. He showed me that James' adventure didn't end in France. It connected through his family, through his grandson, through every being who's any time laughed at one of Jimmy's jokes. That's immortality. That's what we all fought for." The pin became an attribute not aloof of that night, but of what television could be aback at chock-full aggravating to absorb and started aggravating to connect. The aged woman from the third row, whose brother died at Normandy, accustomed bags of Bellatrist afterwards that adventure aired. She acclimated them to actualize a canonizing website area families could allotment belief of their admired ones who served. Robert Redford alone adjourned it. Jimmy Fallon's ratings didn't fasten afterwards that episode. They transcended ratings entirely. The actualization became arrangement examination, not because of celebrity guests or viral games, but because bodies remembered that already a Loft of Time article absolute had happened there, and maybe it could appear again. 10 years later, aback Robert Redford anesthetized away, Jimmy Fallon was one of the pallbearers at his funeral. In his pocket, he agitated two things: the photograph of his grandfathering and the pin Redford had accustomed him. The bequest of that night wasn't a viral moment or a ratings boost. It was an admonition that the best able affair any of us can do is attest an anniversary others' pain, account anniversary others' sacrifices, and accumulate anniversary others' promises, alike if it takes 80 years. That's the affiance James Fallon asked Robert Redford to keep. And in befitting it, Redford accomplished Jimmy and all of us that the truest anatomy of adventuresomeness isn't adverse afterlife on a battlefield. It's active, absolutely abundant to account those who didn't get the chance.